family stuff, being about. I gotta do the
This is random, but can you rent tools from all of those and
Oh, I don't know. I know you can like get a perfect.
I mean, that would defeat the purpose, I guess.
Like selling equipment.
Right, like, well,
All right, if I could get everyone back in their seats so we can commence the next informal meeting for CMPC.
I'll slide over. You might want to sit behind. They said they had.
It's more streamlined this year, just to try to get people out of here. Yeah. I'm hanging in there. Good. Getting kind of tired of all this stuff. What can you do about it? Just gotta live with it. Oh, really? How old is it?
72.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like way 18. He had to be, at home by himself. Which my grandparents still alive.
Mm.
Mom can take care of. To be honest, she can't get around. She's that's way.
So you've been managing it okay?
Yeah,
Within reason?
It's good. everything's fine until like Tuesday. So you try to get back to work after 14 days, which is 2 weeks.
I've heard that the energy drainage is
The
unbelievable.
second wave hit him,
Mm-hmm.
and it just he's got pneumonia now. So,
He's not in the hospital.
not in hospital, he's got a breathing machine, breathing treatment thing at home. He's just going to start crazy. He's just like, he wants his keys to get out of the house. Mom's ready to keys away from him.
Uh-oh.
Because he's got a real bad fog. It's something like, I don't know what it's called, it's like a cooling fog.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Not clear
everything's
thinking.
blurry, not everything, so he's, he's, his body's telling him to stay at home.
Right.
His mind's telling him, I want to keep going.
My dad is 96, and he's in assisted living. I haven't laid eyes on him since March.
And that's something.
And he's not doing well. I mean, they just, they don't, he needs he can't hear.
Right.
And so he needs the social interaction, and it's kind of taking a toll on him.
That's,
Way up my.
my wife's grandmother is here in Montgomery at one.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm just trying to get word about where I think on it.
I'm just gonna turn it over to you.
It'll be a short presentation.
That's the end of the
They're on the elevator. I just put them on the elevator. I'm sorry, Judge. They're queued up out there. They're queued up out there, trying to disappear.
As long as they're not packing, we'll be okay.
No, they're not.
Like the Baker Mayfield commercial.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's put Wendy's in the middle. And you're going, so once you see it there, Wendy, this is your reminder.
Jeremy was watching online, and he said that anytime when I'm speaking directly to my phone, he can hardly hear it. I mean, you gotta be on the line. And so just try to remind everybody to speak. If the mic's not off.
Mike? Yeah. Y'all back here, and we just have to queue up. Yes, sir, we are. Apologies for the delay.
All right. We will commence the informal meeting for CNPC. This is December 8th, 2020, and we are here for an informal meeting called for by the provisions of rate CNP for Alabama Power Company. The purpose of today's meeting is to allow for a review and discussion of Alabama Power's efforts to comply with environmental and other governmental mandates and the costs associated with those compliance efforts. The company's compliance efforts and costs for 2021 and beyond are reflected in the filing made with the Commission on November 16th of 2020. Interested parties were made aware of today's proceeding pursuant to a Commission notice issued on November 2nd, 2020. I am John Garner, the Chief Administrative Law Judge here at the Commission. The format we'll follow this morning is to first hear an overview of the most recent CNPC compliance factor filing by Alabama Power, and we'll follow that with questions from the Commission staff and other interested parties. As far as the ground rules for participation beyond the staff, I will call on those individuals who indicated a desire to speak when they signed into the meeting this morning. As we did previously, when I call on you, you'll need to come to the podium to speak. And if you are not at one of these tables or the podium, you should not attempt to interject into the proceedings. I will note that we will confine today's meeting to questions about Alabama Power's environmental and governmental mandates compliance efforts. We are pleased to have everyone in attendance, both physically and by our live stream. And I'll again emphasize that although we don't normally do so, the commissioners determined that today's meetings would be live streamed for the first time in light of the novel physical attendance challenges presented by the coronavirus pandemic. Because we are this year required to keep the number of physical attendees down to comply with all safety protocols and to ensure the well-being of those who are here presenting, the determination was made to live stream to ensure that interested parties who desired to observe today's proceedings but were unable to do so due to health concerns had an opportunity to do that. As I said earlier, just as everyone else is, we're hopeful that future years will not present the physical challenges that restricted attendance today. But in an effort to keep the number of physical attendees down, the commissioners have elected to observe today's presentations via the live stream instead of being here in person as they normally are. But as always is the case, the commissioners have been individually briefed by staff on the filings that are being discussed today, and they will be in a position to delve into any questions or concerns that are raised throughout the proceedings today. And that would be through follow-up meetings individually with the commission staff. I would note that, as was the case in the earlier meeting today, each office is represented by their staff in the proceedings. For those in attendance, we do expect compliance with the participation protocols that I just went over. We do have officers here from the LEO providing security should it be necessary to deal with any violations of the participation guidelines. And I'll again point out that even though today's informal meeting is being live streamed due to the unusual circumstances that we have this year, I would note that since this is not a formal contested case hearing, it may be recorded so long as you do that recording in a manner that's not disruptive. With that, I will call on Mr. Dan McCrary, the attorney for Alabama Power, for an introduction of the individuals who will be speaking on behalf of Alabama Power and for the provision of an overview of the company's presentation.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Your Honor. Consistent with the Commission's notice of informal meeting issued November the 1st and the provisions of Rate C&P Part C itself, the purpose of this meeting is to provide an overview of Alabama Power's current environmental compliance activities and to promote a better understanding of what those activities involve. Alabama Power has kept the Commission informed as to its environmental compliance plans and strategy through periodic meetings, status reports, and other such communications with the staff, all of which are consistent with normal monitoring activities and are also specifically contemplated under the Commission's accounting order related to the effects of pending environmental mandates. As in prior meetings, the company's presentation consists of 3 parts. However, given the challenges associated with COVID-19, we've streamlined our discussion by eliminating some of the historical information that has previously been included, focusing more directly on regulations that are prompting current compliance activities and the associated costs. Wendy Holmes, Alabama Power's Assistant Comptroller, will begin with an overview of the financial aspects of the company's activities pursuant to its 5-year environmental compliance plan. With regard to environmental laws and mandates, Mark Steele, Alabama Power's Air Compliance Supervisor, will address air-related rules and regulations. Mike Godfrey, Alabama Power's General Manager of Environmental Compliance, will discuss land and water mandates with emphasis on the coal combustion residuals rule and the effluent limitation guidelines. Finally, Ed Healy, Conceptual Engineering Manager in the Environmental Solutions Group at Southern Company Services, will summarize the major implementation activities that are currently underway to achieve compliance. With that introduction, I'll turn it over to Wendy.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning. My name is Wendy Holmes, and I'm the Assistant Comptroller for Alabama Power Company. Our purpose today is to give an update on the company's 5-year environmental compliance plan. The costs that are included in the plan are reflected in the company's rate C&P Part C filing. As such, I would first like to give an update on that filing, which was made on November the 16th. The filing indicated an additional revenue requirement of approximately $59 million. However, consistent with the commission order dated December the 2nd, the company will be leaving the compliance cost recovery factors flat for 2021 billings. As such, there will be no change in rates for rate C&P Part C for 2021. Now I will provide an overview of the cost associated with the compliance plan. Mark and Mike will review with us some of the environmental regulations impacting Alabama Power. Then Ed will describe the various technologies that we will be using to ensure compliance with existing regulations. The cost I will present today represent the cost to comply with regulations that are currently in place. The financial overview will highlight the following areas. First, I'll provide a brief update of plant placed in service and operation and maintenance expenditures for 2020. Next, we'll look at the current estimate of capital expenditures for 2021 through 2025, and I'll also present the estimated closure cost associated with the coal combustion residual rule for the upcoming 5 years. I'll also discuss our plans for plant to be placed in service in 2021, as well as our current forecast of operation and maintenance expenses for 2021 through 2025. We have updated the 2020 estimated total cumulative plant in service that we provided this time last year. At last year's meeting, we estimated that the 2020 total cumulative plant in service, the information that you see in red, would be $5.025 billion. Our current estimate of this amount, which includes actual results through September 30th of this year and utilizes an estimate for the remainder of the year, is $4.933 billion, or approximately $92 million less than what we estimated for this year. For 2020, the company will place approximately $143 million of new environmental plant in service. The majority of this is related to wastewater management projects. We have also updated the estimated environmental operation and maintenance expenses for 2020. We are projecting 2020 operation and maintenance expenses associated with environmental compliance to be approximately $40 million lower than our original estimate of $134 million provided last year. This variance is primarily due to lower contractor, chemical, and materials costs, as well as reduced labor allocated to our environmental activities. Additionally, gypsum and ash sales were higher than we originally estimated, which also results in lower O&M costs. At this time, the company has identified approximately $392 million in environmental capital expenditures over the next 5 years. These expenditures include projects that are the results of finalized environmental regulations that Mark and Mike will discuss. Approximately 45% of these costs relate to capital expenditures associated with water regulation, specifically the ELG rule. Ed will discuss these expenditures in his presentation. The remaining expenditures are primarily associated with ongoing capital maintenance type items and are not related to large capital projects like we've seen in prior years. These amounts do not include the CCR ash pond closure costs, which I will show in a few minutes. Additionally, in 2021, the company expects to place in service approximately $68 million of new environmental plant assets. The projects will occur throughout the year, with the largest expenditures occurring in June for SCR projects at Plant Miller, and in November for several different projects at Plant Gaston, with the largest expenditures being associated with the baghouse replacement project and the ash handling project. discussed the last few years, the recovery of cost of closure associated with the CCR rule is a part of the company's depreciation expense. We are currently projecting costs for closure in place of the CCR facilities over the next 5 years to be approximately $1.6 billion. The total cost for closure will extend beyond the 5-year period and are currently estimated to be $3.3 billion. The cost for closure is separate and apart from the capital expenditures that I presented on the prior slide. As further analysis is performed and closure details are developed with respect to the ash pond closures, Alabama Power will periodically update these cost estimates. Costs to operate and maintain the environmental equipment associated with currently effective regulations for 2021 are estimated to be $141 million and are estimated to total $744 million for the years 2021 through 2025, with an average of $150 million per year. The variations that you see from year to year are primarily driven by the timing of unit outages, maintenance work, and site-specific activities. The information presented today demonstrates that compliance with environmental requirements remains a significant operating cost for Alabama Power. Through 2020, we anticipate investing more than $5.6 billion in capital to comply with environmental regulations. Alabama Power is committed to complying with all applicable laws and ensuring that our customers continue to receive reliable electric service that they expect. Thank you for your attention, and I will turn the presentation over to Mark Still, who will continue our presentation by discussing the air regulations impacting Alabama Power.
Thank you, Wendy. Good morning. My name is Mark Steele, and I'm the supervisor of our air compliance group in the Environmental Affairs Department at Alabama Power. I appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on air-related environmental compliance requirements affecting our company. This part of our presentation will focus on several of the major air-related laws and regulations driving Alabama Power's environmental compliance activities, including air quality standards, hazardous air pollutants, and greenhouse gases. In recent years, we have discussed hazardous air pollutants, including the Mercury and Air Toxic Standards, or MATS rule, and the emission controls and other compliance measures that we have implemented for MATS compliance. More recently, we have also discussed greenhouse gas regulations. This is another area of developing regulations, including EPA's final rule that repeals the Clean Power Plan and replaces it with the Affordable Clean Energy Rule. As we have discussed in the past, the Clean Air Act is the major law driving federal air regulations. It has also been the primary driver for all our air emission control projects. One of the primary provisions of the Clean Air Act is the establishment and attainment of national ambient air quality standards for specific pollutants: ozone, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, and lead. Our particular focus here is ozone and PM 2.5 and the emission controls we have installed to help ensure attainment of these standards. The Clean Air Act requires the EPA to determine for each of these pollutants what concentration in the air is protective of public health, which are referred to as primary standards. Secondary standards are designed to protect against visibility, impairment, and welfare effects. In addition, the Clean Air Act requires the EPA to periodically review the air quality standards, and EPA has revised these standards several times. On July 13, 2020, EPA proposed to retain the current primary and secondary ozone standards without revision. A final ozone standard rule is expected in early 2021. EPA's action here is important as all areas in Alabama are presently in attainment with the existing primary and secondary ozone standards. Generally, ozone is not directly emitted. Instead, emissions of NOx and VOCs react in the atmosphere to form ground-level ozone. For our industry, EPA has focused on reducing NOx emissions to support attainment of ozone standards. Most VOC emissions come from other industry types and other sectors of our economy. EPA's ozone standard has been the primary driver for the installation of selective catalytic reduction systems, or SCRs, to reduce NOx emissions. 6 of Alabama Power's 7 coal-fired electric generating units are equipped with SCRs, and since 1996, we have reduced NOx emissions by 90%. As with the ozone standard, EPA has initiated another review of the PM standards, and on April 14, 2020, the agency proposed to retain without revision both the annual and 24-hour PM 2.5 standards. The 2.5 refers to the size of the particle, in this case 2.5 microns. EPA also proposed to retain the 24-hour PM 10 standards. A final rule for the PM standards was announced yesterday, December 7th, retaining the current standards without revision. As with the ozone standard, all areas of Alabama are presently meeting the PM air quality standards. PM 2.5 standards were the primary driver for the installation of flue gas desulfurization systems, or what are commonly referred to as scrubbers, to reduce SO2 emissions which can react in the atmosphere to form PM 2.5. Scrubbers have been installed on 6 of the 7 coal-fired units Alabama Power operates, and since 1996 we have reduced SO2 emissions by 98%. As part of the implementation of air quality standards, the Clean Air Act also requires EPA to work with the states to address emissions from states that may affect attainment of the standards in downwind states. Interstate transport rules intended to address the downwind issue have been utilized for several years to help areas across the country attain the ozone and PM 2.5 air quality standards. The primary regulation in this area is the Cross-State Air Pollution Rule, and its compliance requirements began in 2015. For Alabama, the Cross-State Rule has 3 separate allowance programs: annual SO2, annual NOx, and ozone season NOx. In 2016, EPA finalized an update to the Cross-State Air Pollution Rule addressing interstate transport relative to the 2008 ozone standard. Compliance requirements for the update rule began in 2017 and included more stringent ozone NOx emission budgets for 22 eastern states, including Alabama. Alabama Power's NOx emissions are within our allowance allocations. Contributing to this compliance are the SCRs deployed on the fleet, as well as reduced NOx emissions from the units that have switched to natural gas or otherwise have been retired. Like many other environmental regulations, the Cross-State Update Rule has been undergoing judicial review. Last fall, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals found that the update rule would not fully resolve all upwind contributions to downwind non-attainment of the 2008 ozone standard by the prescribed dates. The court remanded the rule without vacature for EPA to address the court's opinion. On October 15, 2020, EPA proposed the revised Cross-State Update Rule to respond to the directive of the D.C. Circuit and to fully address outstanding interstate transport obligations regarding the 2008 ozone standard. Relying on updated data and modeling to assess air quality, EPA's analysis in the proposal found that Alabama's, along with 8 other states, projected 2021 emissions would not significantly contribute to non-attainment and/or maintenance problems in downwind states. As a result, EPA is proposing no further NOx emission reductions from electric generating sources in Alabama are necessary to satisfy interstate transport obligations regarding the 2008 ozone standard. EPA is expected to update its modeling analysis in the final rule with 2020 data, which could result in changes to EPA's proposed finding that Alabama's transport obligations have been resolved. EPA is under a court order to finalize this proposed action by March 15, 2021. Next, I'd like to provide a brief update on another provision of the Clean Air Act that is designed to control emissions of hazardous air pollutants, or what's commonly referred to as HAPs. For our industry, the driving EPA rule here is the Mercury and Air Toxics Standards, or MATS rule. This rule includes emission limitations for mercury, filterable particulate matter, and acid gases emitted from coal and oil-fired electric generating units. The rule does not apply to natural gas-fired units. Alabama Power achieved compliance with the rule in several ways. In addition to our reliance on precipitators, SCRs, and scrubbers that were installed prior to MATS, our MATS compliance plan included baghouses, systems to inject additives, conversions of coal-fired units to natural gas-fired units, and unit retirements. All emission controls are operating effectively. Like many other environmental regulations, the MATS rule has been undergoing judicial review. On April 16, 2020, EPA finalized its reconsideration of the supplemental finding for MATS. EPA concluded there were flaws in its approach to considering costs and benefits used to regulate HAPs from coal and oil-fired electric generating units. In the rule, EPA determined that a proper consideration of costs demonstrates that the total projected cost of compliance with MATS, $7.4 to $9.6 billion annually, dwarfs the monetized HAP benefits of the rule, $4 to $6 million annually. EPA reasoned this imbalance is not enough to support a finding that it is appropriate and necessary to regulate HAP emissions from coal and oil-fired units based primarily on the monetized particulate matter co-benefits. However, EPA's conclusion in its reconsideration do not remove coal and oil-fired electric generating units from being an affected source category based on legal precedent regarding the process for delisting sources. Therefore, EPA determined to leave its original 2012 MATS rule unchanged and in effect. The Clean Air Act also requires EPA to assess the remaining risks from HAP emissions, that is to say, the risk review, and developments in control technologies for HAPs, which is the technology review, to determine if more stringent MATS standards need to be established. EPA also took final action on these reviews and determined that the residual risks from HAP emissions from coal and oil-fired electric generating units are acceptable. Further, there have been no new cost-effective HAP controls identified to achieve further emission reductions. Therefore, EPA determined revisions to MATS are not warranted based on these reviews. On August 5, 2020, the parties involved in litigation of the 2016 MATS supplemental findings submitted a joint motion to the D.C. Circuit for the case to continue to be held in abeyance pending resolution in the litigation challenging the 2020 MATS supplemental finding reconsideration rule. On August 26, 2020, the D.C. Circuit granted the unopposed motion to continue to hold the 2016 MATS supplemental finding case in abeyance. Lastly, I'd like to provide a brief update on greenhouse gas regulations, specifically the Affordable Clean Energy Rule. Recall that the ACE rule was finalized in June of 2019. With the ACE rule, EPA provided basic guidelines for states to develop plans to address greenhouse gas emissions from existing coal-fired electric generating units. States must evaluate each affected unit and establish new CO2 emission limits based on heat rate or efficiency improvement that each unit can achieve. States have 3 years to submit their ACE plans, with that deadline being July the 8th, 2022. Alabama Power has 7 coal-fired generating units affected by ACE. Miller 1 through 4, Gaston 5, Berry 4, and Berry 5. This rule is also being litigated, and arguments were held in the D.C. Circuit Court on October the 8th. We expect the court system will play a significant role in the final outcome of these environmental regulations. Thank you for your time and attention. I would now like to turn our presentation over to Mike Godfrey.
Thank you, Mark, and good morning. My name is Mike Godfrey. I'm the General Manager of Environmental Compliance in the Environmental Affairs Department at Alabama Power. I appreciate the chance to provide an update on land and water requirements affecting our company, primarily focusing on EPA's coal combustion residuals rule and effluent limitation guidelines. Let's begin with the coal combustion residuals rule, or the CCR, or the ash rule. In the interest of time, as Dan mentioned, my comments today will provide more of an update than a review of this rule. Generally speaking, recall this rule manages CCR as non-hazardous waste under subtitle D of RCRA and became effective in 2015. Remember, there are 2 options: close in place and close by removal, that are approved by EPA, determined to be equally protective. With close in place, remember, the cap is designed to prevent rainwater from penetrating down into the ash. The slope of the cap must allow for appropriate management of stormwater. Maintaining the cap means preventing large vegetation or animal burrows from reaching the cap, and continued groundwater monitoring to be sure that the cap is working. Close in place has been one of the approved methods, and other independent studies also have demonstrated to be safe and effective. According to other utility internet postings, most ponds will be closed by the EPA-approved cap-in-place method, especially larger ponds. Given considerations such as size, volume of ash, geology, time to close, cost, and other factors, Alabama Power determined the effective course for its ponds would be to minimize the footprint and close them in place. When Alabama Power began implementing various portions of the rule, we worked with ATEM to keep them informed of our progress, since there was no state CCR rule early on. Since then, ATEM developed a state rule that became effective in June of 2018. That rule was revised to reflect certain modifications EPA has made to the federal rule, and a recent public hearing was held on November 5th of this year. ATEM's rule is expected, the new rule is expected to become effective in early of 2021. In previous meetings, we have discussed some of the changes that have been proposed for the CCR rule: extension of cease recede, alternative groundwater protection standards, CCR beneficial use criteria, vegetation height on slopes, and many other things. None of these proposed options has had a material impact on the company's closure plans, predominantly because closure of our ash ponds began in 2016 because of the requirement closure be accomplished within 15 years, and the amended 2020 rule still requires ponds to close within 15 years. So where are we today? Alabama Power has submitted all draft permits and the numerous reports are required under the rules. CCR information is continuously updated on our internet site. Alabama Power held public meetings at each of the 6 plants since this last meeting to inform and engage with the public over our pond closure plans. ATEM has held 3 public hearings for the draft permits at Miller, Greene County, and Gadsden. We await the remaining 3 draft permit public hearings. Alabama Power is continuing to perform activities such as water removal from the pond, infrastructure work, monitoring and reporting in preparation for the issuance of permits and the subsequent commencement of additional closure activities. Well, now let's move on to the effluent limitation guidelines, ELG rule, another rule that impacts the steam electric industry. So let's kind of quickly remind ourselves, what does this cover? And this applies to the water discharge points that are covered in your discharge permit based on wastewater treatment systems used to manage wastewater. Final ELG rule was signed on September 30th, 2015, but it has undergone some revisions since that time. The current rule, known as the Final ELG Reconsideration Rule, was published in the Federal Register on October 13th, 2020, and becomes effective next Monday, December 14th, 2020, or we call it kind of the 2020 rule. The 2020 rule revises, among other things, the bottom ash transport water and flue gas desulfurization or scrubber wastewater portions of the original 2015 rule. While many other process limits were modified, the two above regarding bottom ash transport water and scrubber are the most challenging to deploy technology to ensure compliance occurs. Working on various technologies for compliance continues. One of the conditions we have to think about is the space needed to install additional equipment, how that intertwines with our ongoing operations. These limits are extremely stringent and will be difficult to meet. Some of the technologies used in the development of this rule, as we have mentioned, have not been able to achieve compliance 100% of the time. Where these best available technology limits are more stringent than previously established limits, the new limits do not apply until a date determined by the permitting authority, but not later than December 31st, 2023 for the 2015 rule, but the 2020 rule now has a December 31st of 2025 as the compliance date. Item after receiving information from the discharger must take into consideration the following factors in developing their permits: time to expeditiously plan, design, procure, and install equipment, the need for adequate space and the impact of ongoing operations, changes being made or planned at the plant in response to air regulations as well as the CCR rule. For scrubber wastewater requirements, only an initial commissioning period for optimization of the treatment system and other factors as appropriate, and AIM will act on the request when they issue permits. The final rule updates best available technology and pretreatment standards for existing sources, as I mentioned, for both bottom ash transport water and scrubber wastewater. These generally applicable limits for scrubber are based on a chemical precipitation plus a low residence time bioreactor with ultrafiltration. For bottom ash transport water, the generally applicable limits are based on a high recycle rate system with a site-specific purge allowance determined by the permitting authority based on conditions associated with stormwater maintenance, water quality, and water quantity issues at the site. The final rule separates requirements, includes a separate requirement for subcategories. It's a little new. Subcategorization is one way that EPA takes into account differences within an industry when establishing their best available technology limit. For low utilization electric generation units, the final rule establishes limits for bottom ash transport water for solids and also includes standards for implementing a best management practices plan. Also, chemical precipitation covering arsenic and mercury limits are established for this subcategory. For electric generation units that permanently ceasing coal combustion by 2028, the final rule establishes best available technology limits for solids in both scrubber and bottom ash transport wastewater. The 2020 rule also established a voluntary incentives program called VIP for scrubber that provides the certainty of more time, which is until December 31st, 2028, for a plant to meet more stringent limits for arsenic, mercury, selenium, nitrate, nitrite, bromide, and solids in the scrubber wastewater. This VIP provides a little more flexibility when the permeate or distillate is used as boiler makeup water and additional time to meet those limits. The final rule adds some flexibility to transfer between applicable limits without undergoing a permit modification. However, the provision in the regulations appears to be somewhat restrictive, and we're still working to understand those conditions. Just kind of a summary of what has changed. This revises the technology basis, limitations, and compliance dates for scrubber wastewater and bottom mass transport water. It revises the technology basis, limitations, and compliance dates for the VIP option for scrubber wastewater. It creates new subcategories with tailored limitations and compliance dates for high-flow power plants, low-utilization electric generation units, and electric generating units permanently ceasing coal combustion by 2028 are among the subcategories that exist. Again, this thing about the large-scale operation, this has been and will continue to be into the future with all the technology required. The scrubber limits are not a rollback. The limits are very stringent and require, as I mentioned, a combination of chemical precipitation, biological treatment with ultrafiltration to remove colloidal mercury and selenium. These limits will be challenging to meet, and treatment systems will need to be designed to meet the long-term averages calculated by EPA to meet these limits. But in summary, some of the considerations to keep in mind is the NPDES permitting authority, AGM in this case, determines the appropriate as soon as possible compliance date based on relevant information submitted by the discharger. The compliance date determined by the permitting authority may or may not be different for each waste stream. EPA recommends that the discharger provide clear, relevant information about the facility being permitted, which may include detailed engineering dependency charts, bids or contracts, which include timeframes for installation and operability, information from comparable sites with an explanation of how that information is relevant to the facility being permitted, timing for the integrated resource planning process, and/or timing for public utility commission approvals where needed. EPA recommends that the NPDES permitting authority provide a documented justification of how it determined the compliance date and a fact sheet or administrative record for the permit. As previously discussed, with these combined impacts of the rules, this led to the closure of the ash ponds, and therefore we began the switch to dry ash handling or closed loop systems and wastewater treatment systems a couple of years ago, as we had previously discussed. We will continue to focus on maintaining reliability, ensure we are headed toward compliant options, minimize cost to our customers, among other considerations. We must balance all of these, which requires us to reevaluate our course at times. During the coming year, we'll continue to follow the regulatory developments for any new air, land, or water regulations as we have done in the past. We'll continue to evaluate potential compliance options, with the goal being to identify strategies that maintain system reliability, ensures compliance with the regulations, and minimizes cost to customers. We will continue to maintain flexibility to make other incremental compliance decisions as regulations evolve. And we'll continue to keep the Commission apprised of significant developments over the course of the coming year. Again, thank you, and I would now like to turn our presentation over to Ed.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ed Healy. I'm a conceptual engineering manager in the Environmental Solutions Group. My group is part of the Technical and Project Solutions Group at Southern Company Services, and we are responsible for engineering, construction, and project execution. My discussion today will provide an overview of compliance technologies and the status of projects which are part of Alabama Power Company's 5-year environmental compliance plan. These technologies are required to meet and/or maintain compliance with environmental mandates for air, land, and water. As you heard in Mark Steele's presentation, there's been a significant amount of regulatory activity related to air emission over the past year. However, none of these regulatory activities have yet to result in changes to our compliance strategy. Thus, the current environmental compliance filing reflects maintenance capital, system maintenance and ductwork repairs, scrubber mist eliminator maintenance and mechanical piping system repairs, continuous emission monitoring system maintenance, bag house maintenance and bag replacements, and maintenance on MATS additive injection equipment. All of the equipment is in service and maintaining emission compliance, and the team would be happy to address any specific questions related to the maintenance capital for air projects. As Mike's discussion noted, the ELG reconsideration rule, or 2020 rule, revises the bottom ash transport water and flue gas desulfurization wastewater portions of the original 2015 rule. Since we have extensively reviewed ELG water treatment technologies in previous meetings, my comments today will briefly discuss the technologies required to achieve compliance with the revised ELG reconsideration rule. For bottom ash transport water, the generally applicable BAT limits are based on high recycle rate systems with site-specific purge allowance as determined by the permitting authority. Much of the equipment necessary to comply with the bottom ash transport water limits was installed as part of dry ash conversion projects. Thus, minor changes to the equipment may be necessary once the permits are finalized. For FGD or scrubber wastewater treatment, the technology-based BAT requirement is chemical precipitation plus a low residence time bioreactor followed by ultrafiltration. Because of the highly complex nature of FGD wastewater, several stages of treatment are employed to meet the stringent ELG limits. The chemical precipitation or PhysChem system of the wastewater treatment plant will include components such as equalization tanks, gypsum desaturation, primary clarification, multiple polymer and chemical mixing tanks, secondary clarification, effluent filtration, and solids dewatering and removal equipment. The low residence time biological treatment plant utilizes a patented fixed bed dual stage bioreactor process. The system will biologically reduce selenium, nitrates, and other heavy metals to remove those constituents from the FGD wastewater stream. Finally, ultrafiltration is used to polish the wastewater and remove residual constituents to meet compliance. As Mike noted, the ELG reconsideration rule allows time to expeditiously plan, design, procure, and install wastewater treatment equipment. Industry experience indicates that planning, engineering, procurement, and construction of the entire wastewater treatment plant typically requires 44 to 52 months, depending on the project scope and other site-specific factors. Finally, given the complexity and variation of the incoming FGD wastewater stream, there continues to be concern over inconsistent performance based on both pilot plant data as well as water treatment equipment vendors, as well as full-scale systems operating across the industry. As a result of this inconsistent performance, wastewater treatment vendors are adding additional equipment and redundancy to make the performance more predictable and reliable. The result is a water treatment plant that is more costly and complex than what was originally selected as the basis for the ELG rule. To address these ongoing performance uncertainties, the company continues a broad research program on a variety of water treatment technologies, including membrane technologies, to reduce compliance uncertainty and lower capital and operating costs. The company continues to evaluate technology options required for the ELG reconsideration rule, and the company will apply the same disciplined approach to the technology selection that has been demonstrated over many years. Recall from last year's meeting that the company has substantially completed all dry ash conversion projects and water reroute projects, thus paving the way to initiate ash pond closure activities as of April 2019. In June, July, and October of this year, the company held public meetings to educate interested parties on the company's plans to safely and securely close the ash ponds. Visitors were able to visit multiple stations to learn about topics such as ash pond closure designs, water treatment, groundwater assessment, ash beneficial use, and environmental stewardship. Relative to the company's ash pond closure program, all of the projects incorporate the following steps to ensure the ponds are closed safely and permanently. First, the removal of water, where advanced water treatment measures ensure that all water from the ash ponds meets NPDES permit limits, which are protective of in-stream water quality. Second, consolidate the footprint, where CCR material is carefully moved further away from rivers and waterways, creating protective buffers while reducing the size of the ash pond footprint by up to 1/2. Third is to integrate additional protections. Using advanced engineering techniques, additional features such as redundant dike systems, custom drainage, and protective structures are incorporated in the closure design for enhanced groundwater and robust flood protection. And finally, permanent closure with ongoing monitoring, where special engineered barriers constructed over the CCR material to keep it safely and securely in place. Ongoing monitoring of groundwater ensures water quality around the closed site is protected. The current status of the company's 5 active ash pond closure projects are as follows. All sites have commenced ash pond closure activities. Sites with a new NPDES permit or approved 8M dewatering plan outside the NPDES permit have begun dewatering the ash ponds. All projects are now 100% complete with engineering and have submitted engineering drawings and closure plans to 8M for review and approval. 8M has issued draft CCR permits for Miller, Greene County, and Gadsden, and 8M has completed their public hearings for each of those facilities. Draft permits for Berry, Gaston, and Gorgas are anticipated to be issued soon. All active sites have contractors mobilized. Work on infrastructure such as roads, equipment pads, construction power, dredge infrastructure, piping routes, and so forth are nearly complete. And based on the current plans, the projected completion dates for the pond closure range from 6 to 12 years. The company's overall goal is safely sealing and securing each site and using the best possible engineering plan while protecting the environment. This concludes my remarks today. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'll now turn the program over to Dan McCrary for some closing comments.
Thank you, Ed. As contemplated under the rule governing this meeting, Wendy, Mark, Mike, and Ed have reviewed the company's costs attributable to mandates affecting Alabama Power, the rules and regulations comprising those mandates, and the status of compliance-related activities that are currently underway. Through its environmental compliance process, the company continues to evaluate and pursue safe and effective solutions consistent with system reliability. Working with the Commission, Alabama Power employs a disciplined yet responsive approach to developing its compliance plans. This approach allows the company to react and adapt where feasible while implementing appropriate solutions on an efficient and timely basis. With that, Judge Garner, we are available to answer questions.
Let's begin with questions from the staff.
Thank you, Judge Garner. As mentioned earlier, I am Patricia Smith, the Public Utility Analyst Manager of the Electricity Policy Division here at the Commission. I have with me Mr. Tad Mason. He's an attorney with our division, and he will be assisting with questions. As we did in connection with the RSC meeting earlier, the Commission staff has developed questions related to the rate CMP Part C filing and the 5-year environmental compliance plan to highlight various areas that may be of interest to those in attendance today. I would like to thank each of our Power representatives for their detailed presentation concerning rate CMP Part C for 2021. In Ms. Holmes' presentation and in accordance to the 2021 rate CMP Part C factor filing, the projected under-recovered amount is approximately $59 million. Could you expand on the drivers for this projected under-recovered position in 2021?
Sure. You're right, our filing does show a $59 million under-recovered balance. In looking at that compared to our 2020 filing, there are a couple of things that do stand out as drivers. The first one is that if you look at the costs that we expect to recover under the current factors, those costs are about $25 million lower than we would have recovered in 2020. So that is one of your more significant drivers. Another is the fact that within this filing, I know that you're aware that there is a true-up for prior year costs. In both years, we see a benefit from that true-up. However, in the 2020 filing, there was a $55 million benefit versus the 21 filing, which only reflects a $33 million benefit. So the difference between those benefits is another $22 million of revenue requirement for 2021. Those are the larger drivers. Smaller drivers include increases in both the operation and maintenance and depreciation expense. That's about $19 million combined. And then all of those items are actually offset slightly by about a $7 million decrease in the revenue requirement associated with the net investment. So all of those items combined give us the $59 million under-recovered balance for 2021.
Thank you.
Well,
Now let's move to the environmental compliance plan for 2021 through 2025. Can you discuss the company's expectations as to the need for capital spending on environmental compliance projects over the remainder of the horizon through 2025?
I can. I'm actually going to flip to the capital expenditure slide here. As you saw in the presentation, really we don't have large capital expenditures beyond the cost that we are incurring to close the ash ponds, like we've seen before in the past. You do have a couple of years of some ELG work that's still remaining at a couple of our plants, but beyond that, it's really more of what we deem just capital maintenance. It's the day-to-day type activities, the capital expenditures to keep the equipment that we currently have in place functioning properly. Things like catalyst replacements, and Ed, you may have some additional examples of things that we kind of deem that capital maintenance category.
Yes, so certainly on the air side, it's primarily the maintenance capital with catalyst. It's routine maintenance to the scrubbers, routine maintenance to the baghouse. Every several years, those baghouses require rebagging. Those are, I guess, spread over that 5-year period, but no one big project that you can point to.
Thank you. Each year, the company files a preliminary environmental compliance plan, and then once all the final analysis are done, a final environmental compliance plan is filed. The preliminary was filed on November 2nd, 2020. Have there been any significant updates for the final version of the environmental compliance plan?
I can answer it from a cost perspective. We actually did have one change this year. In the preliminary filing on table 4, the other generation environmental capital expenditures. When we originally filed the preliminary back in November, we had allocated too many costs or too much to the Berry 8 environmental projects. For 2021, 22, and 23, those dollars totaled about $59 million. As we continue to look at this and make sure from a budgeting standpoint that we knew exactly what all was included in those expenditures, we determined that we had allocated too much of the total cost of that Berry Unit 8 to environmental. No change to the total overall cost of the Berry 8 project. We had just allocated too many dollars to environmental. So for the final plan that was filed today, we have adjusted that. So now you will see in total about $15 million that is being presented for the Berry 8 project. That includes a cooling tower, an SCR, and some SIEMS equipment. Specifically for 2021, it reduced the 2021 dollars about $16,000. I will note that because these are dollars that are not placed in service yet, they do not impact our rate C and PC filing. It's strictly a presentation in the environmental compliance plan. But the numbers that I presented today did reflect the updated numbers and the final capital expenditures that we expect. Anything from did y'all have anything from a regulatory or legal standpoint as far as updates? Sounds like no.
And this will not impact the factor product in any way?
That's absolutely correct. That's right.
The 5-year budget trend for operation and maintenance expenses in this year's filing as compared to last year reflects a year-over-year decrease through 2023, and particularly in 2023. What is the reason for the projected decrease in that year, in 2023?
From filing to filing?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that for 2020 numbers, 2023 was a large outage year. What you see in the budgets that we are filing for 2021 through 2025, 2024 is actually now the larger outage years. We've had some of those outages shift out a year. So when you're comparing the 2020 filing to the 2021 filing, you do see those numbers in 2023 go down, and a large driver of that is the fact that we have shifted some of the outages from 2023 into 2024. You'll also see that not only from a filing to filing, but if you're just looking at the trend, just year over year, the capital or the O&M expenditures, you'll see a larger increase from 2023 to 2024, and that's the driver of that as well.
Thank you. The company's annual rate CMP Part C filing includes a number of specific references to the Central Alabama Resource Edition. Can you explain how compliance costs at this facility are being treated for purposes of rate CMP Part C?
Sure, we did add a good number of references, some additional tables, some additional footnotes related to Central Alabama. From a rate recovery standpoint, in accordance with the accounting order associated with the additional generation, the costs associated with Central Alabama are to be recovered through rate RSC through the end of May of 2023. So what we are doing in the CMPC filing is we are pulling out all of the Central Alabama costs from this filing so they can be recovered through rate RSC. One of the things that you'll see though is that when we presented the ECP, we do include all of the total environmental expenditures, which do include the environmental expenditures for Central Alabama. Those expenditures would then tie to our total environmental expenditures that are presented in rate CMPC, but then we back those out in those additional Central Alabama categories that you're seeing in the filing. So that at the end of the day, our revenue requirement associated with rate CMP Part C excludes any impact from Central Alabama.
Thank you. In review of the 2021 Environmental Compliance Plan, we noted that the CCR land and CCR water projects are not broken out as was in the prior filings. Can you explain the reason for this change?
If you recall, the CCR land was the projects associated with stopping ash from going to the ash pond, and that was the dry ash conversion projects. The CCR water was associated with stopping the water, all those water streams from going to the ash pond, and that was the low volume wastewater treatment equipment installed. So the reason that you don't see those in this filing is that work and those projects are complete.
Thank you. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Mason for his questions.
Thank you. Ms. Smith covered questions specific to the CMPC factor filing and the 5-year environmental compliance plan. My initial questions will primarily deal with the company's ash ponds, and then I'll move on to some other items. During the review of the 2021 environmental compliance plan, the staff noted that the cost for ash pond closures increased. Could you explain what caused the current cost projections for closures of the company's ash ponds to increase over last year's estimates?
I can take a stab at that, and then hopefully my teammates can chime in and help me a little bit here. You're correct. In 2019, we estimated the cost of closure to be about $2.8 million. When we made that estimate, we knew that we still had one pond that had not finalized all of their closure plans. They had not completed what's termed a feasibility study. So the largest driver from the 2019 number that we presented last year to the number, the $3.3 billion that we presented today, is related to the finalization of that feasibility study for that ash pond. As a result of finalizing that study includes contractor bids. We had some design revisions associated with that pond from designs that we had included in prior estimates, as well as an increase in the ash volume. So those were some of the things that led to that increase. Also, in that increase, we also included an additional water treatment facility at another plant. So those things are all included in the increase from 2019 to 2020. Ed, you may have some things you want to, some finer details you want to add to that?
I think just to add to Wendy's remarks there, one of the primary drivers of that is with the completion of 100% engineering on all of the ash pond designs, now the scope is known with some degree or much better degree of certainty. And we have contractors' bids that reflect a fully loaded rate in terms of directs, indirects, productivity assumptions, that sort of thing. And in, I think, one case, the schedule elongated a bit, which adds to the cost of that as well. And I think the other big issue was water treatment equipment, the need to treat more water for a longer duration of time.
Thank you. The company has previously discussed its ability to reuse some of the coal combustion byproducts, and I believe it was mentioned that it was actually increased earlier. Can you provide an update on the company's ability to purchase those products?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, thanks, yeah. So remember, up until about 4 years ago, we had been beneficially, we were able to market about 30% of our ash and gypsum products. Over the last 3 or 4 years, remember, it had moved up to about 60% beneficial reuse was occurring. And in 2019, so let's go back to, so we have all the numbers there, we actually were able to market just over 85% of all our CCR that was produced that year. That year, we burned like 13 million plus tons of coal and generated about 1.2 million tons of CCR. So as you see, that has increased tremendously. I expect for 2020, when this year's over, we'll have a similar number to 2019, so over 85%, be able to do so. One of the things that helps that, think about, we're now handling the ash dry. That makes it, that really helps in the marketability of the ash. So that has been part of that increase in the percentage that we're able to beneficially reuse. Also going, again, just remember that we have, it's still driven by what the market wants, what a vendor's criteria is, how close you are to a vendor's facilities, and just the economy in general still helps drive the needs for CCR to be beneficially reused. So I think that kind of gives you a picture of what we've done last year. So.
Absolutely, thank you. Sure. It was mentioned during the RSC meeting earlier that we experienced an extremely active hurricane season. Were there any adverse impacts to the company's ash ponds as a result of the hurricane activity in the Gulf in 2020?
I've got the microphone, maybe I'll just take that one too, if that's okay. Yeah, so yeah, we did as all the sites, exactly ended up like they would expect them to do. We had no issues. Their structure held up. They're designed to meet those. A lot of attention is always turned to Barry because it's on the coast. It's operated safely since '65, and Barry now has had like 15 tropical storms and hurricanes go over that site within a 50-mile radius, and again with no impacts. Part of it, not only did it impact coastal, but these two particular storms, in particular they came through and had a good bit of rainfall that impacted, had impacts on some of our other ponds, or added more water and flooding in the areas that, not just on the coast this time. But those also, there were no impacts, they're all designed as they're held. Remember, we've had that inspection program since the 70s that we do to make sure they're structurally sound. That's still going on. Remember, those ponds are designed to handle very large rainfall events and floods. Again, never had any issues with those, so that also helps with that. But yes, they did like they're supposed to. No problems.
Thank you. Changing topics, what is the status of the company's compliance efforts regarding the Affordable Clean Energy Rule?
Sure. So with the ACE rule, EPA determined that heat rate improvement measures or efficiency projects constitute what's called or termed best system of emission reduction as far as addressing CO2 emissions from existing coal-fired power plants. So in their emission guidelines, EPA specified a set of heat rate improvement measures. There's 7 of them, and they're called candidate technologies. And the candidate technologies include things like assessing duct leakage, better motors, better pumps, better economizers, better control systems, maybe improved turbine blades, things like that. So the ACE rule requires that each one of these candidate technologies be assessed for potential applicability on each affected unit. So where we are in that process currently is that we're in the middle of doing these heat rate improvement evaluations. And when we're complete with that, we'll give all that detailed information to ADEM. And then it will also include our expectation of what candidate technology will yield in terms of improvement in efficiency. And we'll also give an estimate of the cost to apply each candidate technology on each affected unit. So ADEM will take all of that information, review it, and then they will establish an emission rate standard for each unit. It'll be customized based on what they determine to be the set of applicable candidate technologies for each unit. Yeah. So we expect the emission rate standard to be in terms of pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. And then once the standard is set, EPA will go about their business of developing their state implementation plan for ACE. And then the deadline to submit that to EPA is July of 2022. And then right now, we assume our compliance deadline would be 2 years after that date.
Thank you. Has the company experienced any operational impacts on its compliance activities as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? Also, has the pandemic impacted any of the company's construction activities?
So when we start with the second part of your question, the COVID impact on construction activities, right now that's primarily related to ash pond closure work. And we have not experienced any material impacts or schedule delays as a result of COVID. And I think the reasons for that are just by its very nature, the ash pond closure work is somewhat remote from the site, and that allows good social distancing. Our contractors are adhering to COVID protocols, and between the contractors and the company, it's been very effective case management when there is a positive test. So up to this point, not really any significant impact with regard to construction.
I think, and I'll add to that, from a cost perspective, we have seen some lower O&M costs as a result of COVID. As you can imagine, some of our company safety protocols are limiting the number of people at our plant sites just to ensure that we're able to protect the people that need to be there to run those plants. So as a result of that, we did have some outage work that was shifted out of 2020. So we do see some reductions from the outage costs, the maintenance, the contract labor associated with that. Additionally, from an overall revenue standpoint, because of the recession that resulted after or as a part of the COVID pandemic, the recovery under rate CMPC, that cost recovery has been lower than what we originally anticipated as well. So those are some things that are going in and factoring into our 2020 numbers.
Does the company expect the change in administration to have any significant impact on rate CMP Part C?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess nobody can say for sure what's going to happen. I will say that each time we've seen administration change, usually regulation changes occur coming after that. I do expect to see most of the air, land, and water issues we're facing now, that we'll continue to face those in some form or fashion. We've all seen news media about a new direction may take on certain issues. Now, I would just be speculating about it. I think I know what's going to happen, so I will tell you that whatever happens, we will make sure that we meet those requirements. We have a very, exhaustive, compliance strategy used to meet compliance, and we'll exercise that to make sure we meet our business needs and still work to ensure and consider any costs that show up for the customers. And that's my crystal ball right there, I guess. Sure. That makes sense.
Thank you. My final question is, can you provide an update on the CUSA and Harris relicensing efforts?
Oh, okay, sure, I'll take to that. All right, so we'll start with the CUSA, go back, this relicensing process began in 2005, so we've talked about that before. Let's fast forward to back in 2018, when FERC, based on comments received, we reverted back to the previous license in 2018. At that time, they stated that they would, they issued some scoping documents and talked about that they would do a new environmental impact statement of the whole CUSA project. In 2018, they asked us at that time for some information. We provided that to them. It's called an additional information request. So we provided that in 2018. They issued another information request in 2019 directed towards their development of the environmental impact statement. So we responded to that. In March of this year, 2020, we received another additional information request from FERC to look at the scoping document and some of those documents they're working on. So, and again, we responded to that. And I guess to this point where we are now, what I expect is the next thing that come out of them will be a draft environmental impact statement, and then there'll be comments on that. Followed by that, there'll be a final environmental impact statement, a biological opinion on the aquatic life, and then a final license at some point in time. But based on, since this began in 2005, I'm not going to try and guess when that might occur. For Harris, in 2018, in June, we gave a notice of intent that we would reproject that license. And with that, we submitted that request along with, it's called the preparation documents that you provide for the public comments to look at, and another scoping document for that. So we've been working on those. Then in November of that year, we also submitted some draft study plans at that time. So in November of that year, then we provided the study plans that had some comments from the public that we included in that. We provided that to FERC. So that process continues on. We've had some public meetings. They've asked us to provide additional options as to how we would operate Harris at this point in time. We provided comments back to them on that. We're in the second year of what they give you a 2-year study period window, if you will. We're kind of into the middle of that second year study, responding to their request for information, response to comments we've had. We held another public meeting back in October where people, and it was a virtual one, but where people came and, had questions and comments, so we responded to them. So at this point in time, this time and next year, we should be filing the official license request. And then on paper, there's a 2-year window where FERC responds with a license, and that's on paper. So that's kind of where we are there with both those projects. I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you. That's all I have.
Anything further from the staff?
Judge Gardner, that concludes our questions we have prepared for today. These questions will be submitted to the company for written responses. In addition, we plan to submit several additional data requests as we continue our review of Rate C&P Part C. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to questions from other interested parties. I believe that Mr. Stetson had some questions regarding CMTC.
Thank you, Judge Garner. Thank you to the panel for a very thorough and methodical presentation. I really want to focus my questions, by the way, I'm Stephen Stetson with Sierra Club. I wanted to ask some questions about coal ash, which is a concern of the many members of Sierra Club across the state of Alabama. And I guess my first question is for you, Ms. Holmes. Just to be sure, there's a lot of big numbers being thrown around here. I think, if I just wanted to confirm that I'm correct, $392 million is the estimated cost for the next 5 years. Is that correct?
In the next 5 years, the cost of removal, is that what you're?
I guess with compliance overall. You tell me what the $392 million was.
Make sure you speak into the microphone, Ms. Holmes.
No, it helps when I turn it on, sorry. Okay, sorry, I'm blanking out on the 392, where are you seeing that number?
I think it was on your first slide. I feel like there was a 5-year projection across what y'all were estimating to be the cost of compliance with the 2015 CCR rule over the next 5 years. And I thought I heard you say that number was $392 million. But again, a lot of big numbers going around, might be wrong.
Okay, I see the 392. The 392 million is the 5-year for all of our capital expenditures. That number does not include the cost associated with the CCR rule.
So the CapEx number is different than the compliance number. Is that, what would you call the other number?
The other number is just the cost of the CCR rule.
Can you tell me what's included in, if it's not CapEx, what else is it?
So we keep it separate because from an accounting perspective, we record that as an asset retirement obligation. So that's why we presented them separately today. The 5-year, the capital expenditures, that's the stuff like the water projects, the capital maintenance we talked about, the bag house bags, the catalyst replacements. Those are the things that are included in that $392 million. So the CCR estimate is actually separate from that, and like I said, from an accounting standpoint, we keep those two numbers separately.
So you enumerated some of the factors that went into what constitutes the CapEx number, the 392. What are some of the factors that go into this other number?
Okay, so the other number, and you guys can help me out on this as well, the other number is actually the cost of actually closing those ponds. It's the big equipment, moving the ash, moving the dirt. It's all of those costs that are included in that number as well.
Right. Okay, and then just so I'm tracking, you also use a bigger number, $3.3 billion, and that is the total cost over the anticipated life of the closure project. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And how long is that?
The 3.3, and you guys chime in, but that's, that is what we are anticipating over a 38-year period, which includes the cost or the actual time to close the pond as well as the post-closure monitoring.
Is that 38 years from now?
The ash pond closure durations themselves would be about 7 to 12 years, depending on the site and the pond. Once the pond is closed, there's then an additional 30-year post-closure care period where groundwater monitoring will continue to take place, maintenance of the cover systems, that sort of thing.
So I guess each pond would have a slightly different individual closure time frame, but from an accounting standpoint, we use a 38-year time period.
And then just so I understand what's going into where y'all get these numbers, I mean, I know you can't predict the future, obviously, but at the end of that 30-year period that you're kind of estimating to come up with that 3.3 billion, what happens then? Y'all stop water testing, or what happens to the maintenance and upkeep of those sites?
I would suspect that if, you're probably familiar with superfund sites and things like that, other remediation projects. While the rule says monitor for 30 years, I think we all know it'll probably go on longer than that. So, but this is the 30-year projection that we have to work with at this point in time.
And that 30-year was outlined by the original rule.
That's correct. That's right.
Correct.
That makes sense.
It does. Thank you so much for both of y'all for chiming in to answer that. So I guess I want to pivot a little bit, and so, Mr. Godfrey, these may be you since you're holding the microphone, but I guess at Sierra Club, we've been thinking a lot about Plant Berry in particular. We're concerned about all of the sites, but I guess these are questions about the compliance plans, and maybe Berry is just an example, so we can, y'all can steer me back if it needs to apply to all the sites, but, so it's against state law, I just want to lay the basis for this, that it's against state law to discharge into the groundwater without a permit, right? So part of this conversation is going to be governed by what y'all are licensed to do or permitted to do at Plant Berry. So I just wanted to establish that the discharges without a permit would be illegal in Alabama.
I guess when you're talking about the administrative orders that were issued a few years ago, is that what you're talking about?
Sure, that'd be one example of enforcing the law.
Okay.
So Berry has a permit, so the conversation, the way I wanted to steer this is basically towards the permit that Berry is currently authorized to discharge.
Okay, the NPDES permit, is that
Right.
what you're talking about?
We're talking about the same, the 2010 permit, is that your understanding when Berry was permitted?
Yeah, the draft permit is out right now for review.
Right, for a new one.
Yes.
So, and I guess, and we're in agreement that that's what governs the discharges to groundwater. I'm gonna bring this back to the CCR pond in a second. I just wanted to establish that these are discharges at the Berry site.
Yeah, I mean, there was exceedances of groundwater, drinking water standards. Not that that's a drinking water source, but that's what drove the administrative order. That's what you're talking about.
Right, okay, so exceedances is exactly where I was going. You anticipated that perfectly, and I was gonna even dial it back to 1991, when EPA looked at Plant Berry and found contamination linked to the ash pond, right? So there have been exceedances, is what you're saying?
I'm not familiar with exceedances from 1991, no.
Well, I will, I guess, assert that the EPA did find some contamination there, but perhaps more recently would be when ADEM issued a fine in 2018. I think it was $250,000 based on y'all's data that said there were some exceedances confirming groundwater contamination near the ash pond at Berry. You remember that one?
Certainly.
So my question, I guess, related to these ash pond closure plans is, why was the company in violation of the terms of the permit? And, well, let me just stop there. Is that a fair question to ask?
Let me understand what the question is now.
Why was Alabama Power down at Plant Berry in violation of the terms of the permit they were issued to receive a fine for contaminating groundwater from the ash ponds that we're talking about?
Well, there was no permit for groundwater, so the NPDES permit is for your surface water discharges.
But the discharges were in violation of the permit, which is why there was a fine?
No, the discharge is because they exceeded groundwater protection standards that are the drinking water standards, even though that's not a drinking water source. That was what the administrative order was about.
Okay. So, where I'm kind of bringing this to is a place where the proceeding before this body and the commission is to determine the inclusion in the rate base of the costs related to the closure of the ash ponds. So if a company was violating the law, why should the people who are paying their Alabama Power bill every month be the one paying for the costs?
Well, I guess that's not a question for me to answer. But this is occurred due to environmental issue that was determined. And so at this point in time, from what I understand, that's a recoverable expense.
Okay,
But again, that's not a question for me to answer.
fair enough. Does anybody else on the panel want to take a crack at that?
We're not here to talk about policy, we're just here to talk about where we are with compliance at this point in time.
Fair enough. Thank you, Judge Garner.
So I guess this is a broader question. At how many of the plants has this coal ash contamination been detected?
We have administrative orders for all 6 of the ash ponds.
So it's a problem at all of them.
It isn't.
Your Honor, if I could, we covered the administrative orders, I think, last year, and it feels like we're kind of plowing ground that was plowed last year. If we could focus on the current plans moving forward, that probably would expedite things.
I think that's more appropriate for where we are at this point.
Point well taken. I'll focus, in fact, this is a question not just about the past, but about the future, and I think it's still for you, Mr. Godfrey, which is, you said in your presentation that ADEM is developing an Alabama version of the CCR, and I think you said you anticipated that going into effect fall of this coming year. Is that correct?
They just had another public hearing on the most recent amendments that they had the initial rule went into effect in 2018. And this was a hearing to add some additional things that EPA had added to the rule since then. So that was the public focus for the November 5th hearing that occurred this year.
So I guess my question is, what does the company anticipate changing as a result of Alabama having our own version of the CCR rule?
I think you'll see it's similar to the federal rule. There's a permit required, which is not required by the federal rule, but other than that, the rules have similar requirements, goals, etc.
Is that, so basically no change you would anticipate as a result of that?
Well, like I said, number one, permit is required by the state rule, which is not required by the federal rule, so that's one item that's different. But that became effective in 2018, so that's why we submitted those permit applications.
Right, okay, thank you. And then I think my final question here, and also for you, Mr. Godfrey, since this is from your presentation. So Mr. Mason asked, and you said, I think that 85% of CCR was recycled in the secondary market, is that correct?
Yes, so the CCR produced in 2019, we were able to recycle ourselves to the market 85% of the CCRs. That's correct.
I know this is not directly related to compliance, but if somebody, our organization is very interested in the amelioration of the ash ponds and the secondary market for those materials is of great interest to us. So if you could, if you know, how much revenue are we talking about, obviously given fluctuations in market demand for secondary materials from the ash ponds, but do you have a sense of what kind of revenue stream that represents?
I think I can take that. We've got about $3 million budgeted for gypsum and ash sales. Over the last couple of years, though, as Mike alluded to, we've been able to sell more than what we anticipated, so those dollars have been more in the $5 to $7 million category.
And is $5 to $7 million roughly, just ballpark here, a reflection of that 85% anticipated reuse factor? Okay. Well, that concludes my questions. Appreciate y'all's presentation. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. State, did you have any questions regarding CMPC? And that brings us to Mr. Johnston with SELC.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I'm Keith Johnston from Southern Environmental Law Center. I'm going to try to mop up some CRC questions real quick, just for clarity. So I think where you are in the permitting process on CCRs, you've had draft permits issued for Miller, Gaston, and Green, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. And would you expect the final, have you had any indication of when you're going to get the final permits for this?
I still don't have that. I think we talked about it before, but yeah, we're still waiting and again, waiting for the next 3 hearings also. So that's, obviously we're closer than we were last time, 6 months ago. But I anticipate, I hesitate to even say, will we get anything before this year end? I'm not sure. First quarter of next year could be when we might see the final permits, but again, I'm, just like you, I'm not sure.
And I think this is probably the same answer for the three outstanding, but Berry, Gaston, and Gorgas.
Yeah, I'm not sure when item, obviously we'd like for it to be sooner rather than later, but I don't have a good feel yet for when we might see those three public hearings on those, the draft permits. Hadn't seen the draft permit yet, so, should be hopefully soon, hopefully also first quarter, maybe next year.
And we know that those sites are, all the sites are obviously different to some degree. Do you know why those three sites are later in the queue? As far as
Gorgas was one of the ones we did not have all the final drawings, so that's the easy one. Berry and Gaston, looking at all the CCR facilities there, I'm not, it could be, why they did, I don't know, there could be some issues they're still working out among themselves there.
Well, that's what I was getting at. I know that Alabama Power has been in close contact with Aiden over this permitting, and there's been some back and forth. But are there particular issues at those sites that are causing the lag in the permitting? Because I know the schedule has also shifted.
Yeah, it has. The fact that they have active gypsum ponds could be part of it. That's the only difference that I can think of, Gorgas, we're closing that ash pond, the gypsum pond, so, but the three remaining all have gypsum ponds, so I don't know if that's a common thread, is that it? I don't know if you.
And then, I missed it, so if you could confirm, did you say you anticipate EPA approval of the state permitting program by this spring?
No, that was the state's approval. It has to go through.
State approval by the state.
Yeah, commission. Now, again, it's another one, it's hard to guess when that might occur. But yeah, this is anticipating that by the time it goes through the EMC process and all that stuff, it could be first quarter of next year, is our guess.
And then, as you've gone through, you started the closure process in 2016 for most of these sites?
Right. Had to begin getting the water off the ponds, that's correct.
Maybe all the sites, is that right?
That's, we began some form or fashion, that's correct.
And then have you had any issues with dewatering at these sites?
Well, dewatering is any new treatment system is always a challenge, so yes, we've had to learn to optimize the system. You heard me talk about the scrubbers, the new treatment system that the new EOG rule says you need time to optimize those. We found that dewatering, again, each site is unique, and so it can be a challenge to learn how to operate those systems and make sure we ensure compliance. So yeah, it's a new system, never operated before. It's always fun to take a new car out to drive.
Have you had to revamp those dewatering plans?
The permit limits and everything are still the same. The way we operate, the treatment system, retention time, those kind of things, typical operational things, I think we're learning, and each one is a little different where we have those systems up and running. That makes sense.
And how is your timeline as far as, you have some experience now with the closure, you've been doing it since 2016. Are you coming in under the timeline? Is your timeline adjusting? How is that playing out in real time?
I think we're seeing the timelines are fairly close to what we've projected from early on. No big major shifts at any of the 6 sites that has occurred. COVID, you heard us talking about, that has not been a big challenge either, just due to the operation. So I think for the most part, we're still, close to the number of years we expected for each of the ponds. We're still very close to what they originally were, if they have changed.
Let me just check and make sure. One thing I did want to ask is, you had stated that closure in place is an accepted methodology of closure by EPA, and it was determined as equally as protective as closure by removal, that's correct.
That's what's said, yeah.
And just on that point, that's as long as closure in place meets the performance standards required under the state permitting process or the federal CCR.
That's correct. Both methods have to meet the groundwater protection standards for each site.
And so if it doesn't meet those actual performance standards, then you have to do something different than closure.
That's why we have, as we talked about, an iterative process that ADEM directs us for any additional steps to take.
And that iterative process, over time, that could include anything, including excavation and removal, is that correct?
You can make you a long list. I'm sure that could be one of them, that's correct.
Okay. I wanted to ask some specific questions about the environmental compliance plan. And one, I wanted to go back to, I think it was testimony from Wendy about table 4 in the back, which on page 72 in the copy that I have, this is the draft preliminary environmental compliance plan from November 2nd. And I think that's the only, table 7 is the only area where there's any mention of the Berry CC unit, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so that's because of the construction costs that have taken place there, right? Thus far? No, that's expenditures for 21 and
Right.
25. So that's what you're estimating, that's what you're budgeting for the next 5 years.
Right,
Is that correct?
and that is just the environmental equipment associated with Berry
And that environmental, and that's getting to my next question.
Okay.
That environmental equipment, that's a cooling tower, is it?
It's my understanding that there is a cooling tower, an SCR, as well as SIMS. Is that right? SIMS, sorry.
SIMS.
We were on the account.
Continuous emission monitoring.
Thank you.
The SIMS, and then, I don't know if I'm reading that line item correctly, but it says needed a cooling tower and other.
Eco.
Eco construction?
Right,
Okay.
right. So as I think it was one of either Chad or Patricia's questions, were there some changes? That was the line I was referencing when I said we did have changes from the preliminary, which is what you're looking at, to the final. And one of the things that we continued to dive into after we filed the preliminary was understanding exactly what that other was and making sure that for the final version, we had those costs and the individual line items presented correctly. So we filed the final version today, and so once you look at that final version, you'll see that table 4 has been updated to reflect those individual line items that I just referenced, individually broken out as well.
And you said that dropped the total budgeted cost over those 5 years, is that right?
Yes. Originally in the preliminary plan, we had about 59 million associated with that one line item that you referenced. In the final plan, the total for the 3 years is about $15 million.
Okay.
So a reduction of about 44 million.
Okay, and just staying on the environmental compliance plan for a bit. On page 75, table 6, you have environmental O&M expenses, and you might have gotten this, you might have gotten some of this in the answer to PSC staff, but table 6, you have the line item for ash sales through 2025.
Let me make sure I'm on the same line that you're on. The one that for 2021 is a negative $2,876,000.
Yeah, I think that's.
Okay, okay.
And that's the same budgeted for through 2025?
Yes.
And why is that number exactly the same? Is that,
I think just
you don't anticipate any changes in your ash sales through
I think
our
before
prior discussion?
we put that into the budget, we want to be a little bit firmer on that. To the degree though that there are differences in that, that will be, as I referenced earlier, one of the things about the CMPC filing is you do have the ability to true up any differences. So to the degree that that number were to come in higher and we were to sell more, then that would be a part of our true up.
But that's a conservative
Yeah.
number right now. On page 78, table 7, and you got your capital placed in service, I think is what it too.
Oh gosh, yeah. Hopefully I can see this. Okay.
Yeah, it was tough for me too. And that's part of my question, is I think you have total generation retirements in there.
Right.
And that is referring to, that's projected as well, but what is that referring to?
That's just our normal day-to-day retirements. For example, if I have to replace a piece of equipment, I'll put the cost of the new equipment on our books and I'll retire off any remaining cost that might be left as far as an older or replaced piece of equipment. So it's nothing new or unusual. It's something that we do on a day-to-day basis.
And I guess last year we talked a little bit about the Gorgas retirement and what that meant as far as rates.
Right.
And RSE, NCMP filing, but are you anticipating any sort of retirements of that nature
No, not at this time.
budgeted? Not at this time, within the next year?
No.
I want to talk a little bit about the ELG rules. You guys have talked quite a bit about that already. But that's a significant part of the spending anticipated budgeted for the next 5 years, along with the CCL compliance.
Right.
And one thing that I've noticed in here, and I have a question about, is in the environmental compliance plan, is the ELG NPDES compliance is so much more expensive at Berry and Gaston compared to Miller. I mean, look on page 63, what you have budgeted for the next 5 years.
So one of the things is the Miller work, and y'all can correct me if I'm mistaken here, but the Miller work associated with the ELG project has already been completed. So that work would have been presented in prior ECPs, environmental compliance plans. The work that you see for Berry and Gadsden is work that is upcoming, that has not yet been completed. So if you're simply looking at the spend in this compliance plan, comparing Miller to Berry and Gadsden, and assuming that's all the same work, it's not reflective of the same work, so it would be.
So you're just further ahead in the schedule for Miller than you are with the other sites, is that basically
Right.
the way to say it?
Right.
Yeah, at Miller, you remember, I think we talked about before that there were state water quality limits that drove some additional treatment earlier on at Miller because of where it was. So that drove us to start installing some of the stuff sooner due to state water quality standards, not the ELG rule. It was not the main driver.
And what were those additional measures that you had to do at Miller because of that
We
location?
just treated some of the metals that were detected to lower limits. So we had to go ahead and begin treating or building this system. Now, we're still working on optimizing the system and things like that. But it was to treat some metals that the state asked for us to start preparing for.
And that NPDES permit has not been issued for Miller.
That's correct. We do not have the draft Miller permit yet.
And well, you tell me, is that gonna come out soon?
Suspect next year, but yeah, I would say early next year too, but again, I'm just, reading the tea leaves like everybody.
on your greenhouse gas portion of your environmental compliance plan, I know there's no mention of Southern Company's zero to no carbon pledge by 2050. Is there a reason that Alabama Power is not, including that in the environmental compliance plan and budgets for the next 5 years?
Well, we don't have any ACE projects budgeted at this time. We haven't gone through that process to determine what exactly we might or might not install.
So does that mean that there is no requirements for you under ACE that Alabama Power would have to implement, or is that just you haven't done analysis at this point?
Well, we haven't gone through the heat rate improvement evaluation. We haven't determined the conclusions from that process yet.
But you have done heat rate evaluations for each site?
Well, right now, we're in the process of doing heat rate evaluations for each of those candidate technologies on each individual unit. You have to evaluate each technology on each unit and customize. And we're kind of doing all that at the same time, but we just haven't completed that process yet.
And does Alabama Power have a separate greenhouse gas goals climate initiative from Southern Company, or they complement Southern Company, for example, their goals and initiative?
You know, we have, since 2007, we've reduced our Alabama Power, we've reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by 38%. And we expect that downward trajectory to continue as our fleet continues to evolve. We're going to continue to develop and deploy a diverse energy portfolio. So as our fleet continues to evolve, as energy technologies continue to evolve, we fully expect we'll continue to positively contribute to Southern's goals.
And that is regardless of the addition of a new natural gas plant?
Well, Berry 8, for example, that will put downward pressure on our goals. Berry 8 will be certainly the most efficient combined cycle unit we have. It'll be one of the most efficient units in the world of its type. So it's natural gas, so it has much less carbon footprint than, relative to coal. And it will be very efficient unit. So both of those combined will continue to put downward pressure on our overall greenhouse gas emissions.
Just want to address some 316A and B questions which are addressed in the environmental compliance plan as well, or which are raised in the environmental compliance plan. And for 316A, what is it, you're doing thermal modeling studies at?
Correct.
At which sites?
Over the last few years, we have either completed or continue to work on them for each site. So every site that we have, every coal-fired facility site or gas-fired site has a study either planned or we've completed. But we'll continue to work on those. And they're in the NPDES permits that are issued and being issued going forward. So that's just part of that.
And which ones are completed at this point? Is that Gaston?
Gadsden is complete, for sure. I'm not sure if we have anything left in Greene County or not, but I know Barry Miller and Gaston will continue to work on those. So, yeah, it's just kind of going through the process.
Do you have any estimation of when those might be completed?
We'll have another year or two. They should be all wrapped up.
And then I know you, for example, you saw the thermal variance at Gaston, right, correct?
Easy to get right.
And do you anticipate seeking thermal variances at all of your other plants?
If we need to, we will, yes. We have variances at several in our existing permits, as you're aware.
But But do you anticipate at every site, you're gonna see a thermal variance? These 316 requirements.
I think that's a potential, yes.
So I guess in light of that, there's no, and maybe it might be in here, and I missed it, but is there any closed cycle cooling plans currently?
So we don't have any plans drawn up yet. Obviously, that is an end result. It could come out of any of this, but there's not a planned one yet, no.
And for your 316B, along the same lines, I know there's numerous studies that the utility has to comply with federal law. Where are you guys in that process?
Some of those are 3, 4, and 5-year studies. We're a couple of years into most of those. So those should be wrapping up fairly soon as well. You know, we've done some work on traveling screens and installed some of those technologies, evaluating those. So we're doing pretty well there, I think.
So you have done some upgrades, correct? According to 316B, the traveling screens, and where were those upgrades?
Let's see, we have some at Berry. Maybe it is, we haven't installed anywhere else. That might be the only site so far, is at Berry. Yeah, I think that's
Speak
it.
into the microphone, Mr. Healy.
Apologize, Your Honor. Berry is the site of the hydraulic screen demonstration project.
That's a demonstration project, and is
To
that,
my knowledge, that's the only one.
that's the only one you have?
One on there to evaluate those.
Okay. And is the idea that you can transfer that technology to your other sites
So,
if needed to
that's
comply with
correct.
316B?
That's correct.
And I guess you have no idea when that may occur.
Not exactly, no.
On the hydropower, you talked about Harris.
Mhm.
FERC required you to go back and look at some issues. Can you describe what those issues were?
Basically, they, not sure how familiar you are with the options as how you operate a facility, but it really goes to flows, what are the temperatures that are downstream, things like that, evaluate various impacts on the quality of life. So that is what the focus of the majority of the additional studies that we are working on and looking at.
And I think one of the issues that Alabama Power has below its dams, as far as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's often DO issues, dissolved oxygen issues immediately below the dam. Is that
Which
correct?
we have enhanced DO dissolved oxygen system at some facilities.
At some facilities, but is that part of the issue that is driving a lot of the concerns about flow regimes at the hydro?
I'm not sure it drive it, but it's a factor in considering the whole overall impact.
And then are those oxygenated
It's a good word.
systems, are those going to be, where are they installed and where are you considering other installations?
Well, we've had one at Logan Martin for a long time. That's the most notable one. We do some additional temporary systems. We have a permanent one there that we can, flip on when we need to. But Logan Martin's the most prevalent one currently.
Just want to follow up, let me make sure. And I'll wrap it up with something I was just curious about that I ran across in your environmental compliance plan, and it's endangered species work. And this is a protected status. The Fish and Wildlife Service has sought protected status for the Gulfport tortoise, which I think Alabama Power is concerned about, and I assume that you're concerned about that because of construction activities, building of lines, that sort of thing. Is that correct? A fair characterization?
Yeah, the Gulfport tortoise in the lower part of the state, you have to manage, identify those sites and take precautions and measures when you come across the Gulfport tortoise.
And you go on to discuss what the power company is doing because of those concerns and because of that proposal for listing official owner service. And you said that you're looking at different types of management tools to preclude the need for listing. What are those management tools that you're talking about?
I'm not sure I'll agree with exactly the tools themselves, but it's basically looking at how do you work around. I mean, you do have the ability to relocate those. That is one of the options that Fish and Wildlife has for you to do so. You can have so that works sometimes. But it's also, looking, is there another way to route over if you have some significant impact? It could involve that. It's just anything that impacts how you would construct and operate one of those lines. What do we need to do to mitigate any impact you may have on the Gulf or Tortoise and their boroughs?
And is Alabama Power opposing listing by the Fish and Wildlife Service in Gulf?
I'm not sure we've officially opposed it. I mean, it's something we have to deal with. But I don't think we're on record opposing it.
Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you, because I'm experiencing oxygenation issues myself. Anything that you want to discuss, Mr. McCreary, before we close out? Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your questions.
No, sir, that's all we have.
All right, then that will conclude the meeting today. Thank you all for attending, physically and virtually, and that will end our live stream. Thank you.